Hey, how's it going, guys? My name is John Park and welcome to another tutorial series. In today's demonstration, I'm actually going to talk to you guys about my design and illustration process for this particular demo. So let's get started. Alright, so basically, I like to always think about my general canvas size is going to be around 4,000 pixels. And now obviously I'm doing a character, so it's going to be more formatted in a I guess more of a portrait kind of landscape or orientation. So what I always like to think about before even getting into the painting is starting off with just some really loose linear guidelines, just to help me kind of think about the overall composition, whether it's it's more about the character or environments or vehicle, but I definitely want to have some sort of visual guide to kind of help give me some sort of guidance throughout the painting process. So I'm just trying to see like what makes sense, like if the drawing doesn't make sense, the painting will not make sense. I know it's very academic of me to say that, but through my experiences of having done tons of illustrations or concept designs, one of the hardest things that I found in painting in Photoshop is just kind of going in there and just like abstractly just painting random things. Now, I would say it is good to do that if you are very experienced and you are a very proficient painter. Guys like Craig Mullins, obviously, he's like one of my favorite painters, and he kind of starts from like the corner of a painting and he can make the craziest, like most masterpiece looking image. If you guys don't know who Craig Mullins is, be sure to check out goodbrush.com. He's probably one of the guys that pioneered or was one of the grandfathers of doing digital art, as far as I know, and he's just amazing. So be sure to check him out. Yeah, so back to the drawing. So this is, for me, I feel like it's one of the most crucial, and it can be one of the more boring parts of the painting, just because you're not seeing a lot of results, and you're not seeing cool splashes of color. But for me, on a just a simple design note of like, okay, what is our image? I just want to kind of block things out, and I'm obviously doing a very simple sketch. So something to kind of keep you guys informed about is, if you're gonna do a painting, the drawing itself has to be accurate, but it doesn't have to be detailed to the point where you have so many details that it's gonna overwhelm your painting experience. So I'm treating it more like a coloring book style, where I'm just thinking about basic proportions and basic shapes. So I'm just drawing in parts of the character's arm, and a lot of times, like if you're ever stuck, and I'm always kind of mentally bogged by my own image at times. A lot of times I'll actually even pull up like reference images. So you guys, unfortunately, I don't have the reference image on this particular demo, but I have multiple screens where I have just a set of poses, or just some sort of like visual reference in terms of cloth, or even architecture for that matter, just to kind of figure out like, okay, what the heck, what does it look like when there, like part of your clothing is kind of bundled up, or what does it look like when there's a certain amount of stretch and pull from like your sleeve or the garment that your character is wearing. So a lot of that stuff, I haven't had much experience, or I tend to forget what that looks like. So I'll need a little bit of some reference to kind of help give me or provide that information. I think in terms of like architecture, it's another thing too, because this particular piece was inspired by a Mullins piece, and I'm a total fanboy of his. So a lot of pieces that you're gonna see in the next several tutorials is basically a visual tribute to him and the amazing artwork that he's shared. But one of the things that I really loved about one of the Assassin's Creed paintings he's done is just the juxtaposition of a character in a characterized kind of background or environment. And I kind of wanted something like that for this particular image. Was I wanted to try out, could I do that? Because a lot of times I think when I paint, it's always about like that one image or that one subject matter per se, but nothing else. It kind of dies off. So I wanted to see if I can kind of find a really cool relationship or juxtaposition between the character and basically the architecture. So I'm just kind of working in a little bit of a little bit more details, of the actual costuming. And I always kind of tend to fuss with the face, mainly because, faces are, for me, it's been incredibly hard to draw. But also just kind of the gesture of the face is something that I'm always kind of trying to figure out, like what looks cool. And keep in mind, a lot of these poses are super, super static. So, I'm not trying to go for anything extremely, I guess, extremely kind of like, dynamic or anything. Mainly because it would probably take me twice as long, but it's more of a study of figuring out more about just the simple composition of a character and the background. So it's a lot easier for me to approach. So you'll find that I'm like making these tiny little marks. And again, guys, the line drawing is really just it's just on your notes, I do this in the professional world, where I will have line drawings just only on the side. If I'm doing like complex scenery or like complex, super photo bashed paintings, because a line drawing, it really serves as a visual guidance. And so, to have that kind of roadmap just gives me the confidence of like, okay, where am I going with this piece? And what do I need to do to kind of prepare for it? So like I'm like sketching in kind of like parts of the character's armor, going back and forth on the hood, seeing what looks best. But even thinking about it as I'm looking at this image, there's a lot of areas that are slightly unresolved. Like, what does the architecture in the back look like? Is there some sort of texture that I can actually put into it that will make it look good? Even like the sword of this character, like what does it look like? A lot of times, like I can get very lazy, and I think we all kind of fall into this trap where if we don't want to show something, it's easy to just kind of fake it. But a lot of times, I feel like that will only take your artwork so far. So if you can actually figure out and resolve what your design looks like, whether it's just aesthetically or if it's historically accurate, I think it gives a lot more depth to your images and even to you as an artist, because you've kind of taken the time to really figure out how that looks and how that translates. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this on a multiply layer so that I can kind of start my painting process of painting underneath. Let's go ahead and grab a simple texture brush here, and I like to kind of start off with like a warmish tone, and I just kind of scruff in just some textures, and there's nothing really to it. It's just kind of like a wash per se, something that oil painters tend to do. And I'm just adding a little bit of color in the background. And I'm going to combine these so that you guys can kind of see what I'm doing. I'm just going to kind of lighten it up just a little bit so we can see our sketch. But this acts as a pretty nice just undertone. So we can just kind of tone the canvas basically. If we're talking more in terms of like traditional sense. But with that, I'm gonna add just a little bit more more color texture, and this is gonna give me, you know, kind of take away that dull look and give a little bit more vibrance to the color. And then from here, I'm just gonna go ahead and see if there's anything else I can do to kind of give a little bit more punch. And obviously you can do whatever you want in the background, because this is just it's just an underpainting, it's a wash. So if you want to isolate certain things and keep it a little bit more cleaner and hide a lot of the wash underneath, then what you're seeing here is I'm just kind of blocking in some very basic value tones, just to figure out what all this is gonna kind of look like in the final. And even like doing silly things like where I'm adding a little bit of overlay to add just that punch of color, just to see if there's some like nice oranges that we can kind of bring into the image. So I duplicated the image because it got a little bit hard to see. So I want to make sure that I can see through all this chaotic kind of mark making here. Another really cool book on mark making is there's several books that I always look at when I do these types of illustrations. One is with Richard Schmid. He's a really great source. I finally got through reading his book. It's full of so much knowledge that a lot of times like it kind of goes over my head, only because I'm also trying to figure out, you know, his painting process and kind of that traditional, you know, sense of working. So it's fairly new to me as well. But it's a great book. I highly recommend it for those of you who are into more that painterly kind of, you know, illustration style. So I'll definitely say check that out. Another great book is obviously the John Singer Sargent books are great. There's a lot of just really cool paintings that I haven't seen on the internet that's been printed out, and you can just kind of examine and just really pay attention to kind of the fidelity of his paintings and how he controls the focal point just through the uses of brushes, you know. So it's a really just a really good book, and I try to limit my the number of books and resources that I have around, because it just gets really overwhelming, you know. So I know a lot of artists, you know, including myself, we like to kind of just collect. We like to collect reference. So one thing that I would say is that helped me is, you know what, just have like one book, maximum two, but just have that one book and let it be your sole kind of like go-to kind of reference or book reference or Bible per se, you know. And don't let anything else kind of interfere with that, just because you kind of want to absorb as much of that image as you can. So sorry for the long rant, but what I'm doing here is I'm basically applying some local color on top of the undertone painting. Now, the reason why I actually even did the undertone painting is because I want a little bit of that that orange to seep through, and it's kind of like a, I don't know if I'm using this correctly, but I know a lot of illustrators who work traditionally, they do the undertone painting to kind of map out and figure out the basic value, the basic composition, and the structure of their painting, and then they apply colors. But in this sense, since we're working in Photoshop, you know, I'm kind of using it as more as an effect, rather than actually treating it as a true underlaying painting. So it's just a way for me to kind of like fake in as if I've, you know, did an underlay painting, and then apply the colors on top. So what I'm just doing here is I'm just kind of using it as more of a mask per se. And now I'm just really trying to figure out, you know, the general local colors of the materials of the fabric, the clothing, the armor, and all that stuff. I wanted to go with more of this punchy red color. I was heavily influenced by there's a classical artist, if I can kind of get at the top of my head, Palio Giovanni Bedini. I think it's Paolo Giovanni Bedini. He has such amazing colors, and just his use of like contrast with characters in backgrounds is just phenomenal. Really beautiful work. If you guys don't know who he is, definitely check him out. He just has these characters in full-blown red, you know, juxtaposed against like a more of a darker background. Just phenomenal artist, and it's something that I kind of wanted to integrate into my own work, was that sense of visual contrast, that kind of bold, you know, color, that kind of like juxtaposition between having like a dark background and a really punchy red. And when you think about it, you're like, an assassin with red. I mean, like having a pure red, you know, Red Riding Hood looking suit makes like no sense, right? It's just kind of cheesy, but from just creating that contrast though, I think it really helps. It makes the image look provocative, you know, really you know, draws the eye in, and that's kind of what I wanted to create. So I'm gonna go ahead and just combine these two, so that you can see. I always have the layers on a group, just in case if I need to go back, or if you guys want to check out the process, you can see what I'm doing here. So one thing I want to show you guys is, you'll see me toggling with these little textures here, and it's no different from implementing a texture into your painting, but this is something that's a little new and different. For those of you who don't know what this is actually Pattern Stamp Tool. So basically what I've done is I import a texture, and instead of creating a brush, you go under Edit, and you create, or you define, Pattern Stamp, and that mode is actually under your Clone Stamp tool. So be sure to check it out. I have a couple of other videos that I've made that kind of show that, so I do apologize if I didn't show a clear example of that here, but that's kind of what I used there to kind of get that, you know, strange textury effect. So I brought in this architecture of this like cathedral front, and I found like the perfect angle here, and this is a total cheat, but just to kind of get the point across, I wanted to use this as basically as kind of like my stepping stone. It's a big step, to kind of block into my background. And obviously I sketched in my my perspective, but this just happens to perfectly line up. I mean, there's tons of photos on like cathedrals and St. Peter's cathedrals and all these other types of architecture that's shot from multiple angles. And I just found the one here, and I'm gonna put it on a mode. Overlay tends to work. Another one that's pretty good is also soft light. So soft light's really great for just having more subtle textures kind of getting implemented into your background. So as you see, as I toggle on the line drawing, you can see kind of like what we're working with. And obviously I don't want like the complete photo look, because then it just feels, if it makes the image feel cheap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use it as a starting point, because it gives me so much contrast, right? It already gives me these predetermined values, but more importantly, a lot of the textural element is just a good architectural reminder of, okay, there needs to be more stuff, so let's add in more stuff. So that's kind of like what I'm trying to figure out. Um, I'm I'm always constantly testing out, colors. Like, if there can be like blue kind of stained glass window textures in the background. But I think it was drawing too much attention away from our image, so I decided to go a little bit more. Let's just keep it simple and black back there. And I'm color picking and kind of inventing my own architecture, very very slightly. I mean, I don't want to take too much credit for just slapping in a photo, but it gives me the liberty to kind of figure out what is the best way to help punch out my own image. I'm just gonna make a selection here on the side columns, and I kind of want that value to kind of pop a little bit more. So I'm gonna use a little bit of this yellow, slightly give it more of a reddish tint, and I'm constantly always testing out, seeing how that looks. Because again, we put an underlay painting in there, and it's giving us a lot of nice value. Now it's time to kind of figure out, okay, well, we got the value down. Well, what is the color going to be? Because right now that's still the under painting. So I don't want it to just end up being just pure orange, but at least have some sort of indication of color of some sort. Oh, another really really cool thing that I've actually stumbled across is this brush called the Art Pen. Really big thanks to one of my good friends, Matt Zickery. He actually introduced me to this pen, and you can basically rotate your pen in any direction, and it's kind of like it feels really natural, only because if you want your pen to be angled, all you have to do is just twist your pen. You don't have to do no crazy wrist action, or put your brush on like some sort of weird direction mode. This is just on rotation mode, and it's literally what the Art Pen does. So you see here, I'm also just kind of adding a little bit more architectural just notes per se, like based off of my line drawing. So I'm just adding some accents here of color, but also just more linear information. Because again, for something this complicated in the background, it's really going to kind of like hold up if you have a lot of the architectural information, and not just blobs of color. So a lot of times, like, I'll just do random blobs of color and I'll look back and I'm like, what the hell did I just render? It looks like a big piece of turd, So it helps to kind of define just a couple of things, so that you can really figure out where you're going with your painting, especially for architecture, because it's such a pain in the ass. And you can see, like, I'm getting quite lazy with it. I'm like, screw it, man. I just whatever, there's little indents here, and there's gonna be a shadow here. That's good enough. Add a little bit of a darker value here. I think I want that. I think it's called a buttress, but it's basically that column that sticks out. I really want that to kind of protrude, so I'm gonna put a darker value. Give it a little bit of this red tone. And keep in mind, guys, like in this whole phase, I mean, it's something weird. Like I'm kind of the type of painter who blocks in and plays with color in the very beginning phases, and it's quite ugly. I'm not gonna lie, it's one of the most ugliest, foul looking phases of the painting for me, because I'm just trying to figure stuff out. We figured out the design, we figured out the base of the color, but now I'm truly trying to figure out the rest of the image, and a lot of it's just experimenting. It's kind of playing with color and testing things out. So it really feels like kind of and this only applies to guys really, but when you get a haircut, and if you kind of buzz the side of your hair, or or you got a really short cut, and it's at that phase where it's this weird in between, it's growing out, and you look kind of like a bum, or you kind of look not as clean. That's what I feel like this is, you know. It's just a really messy looking process. And there's this thing called pushing paint that I've heard this term before, and it is, a lot of it kind of feels like that. I'm just kind of pushing color around to kind of figure out what I want, just in terms of color. And also, when it comes to architecture and design, you know, obviously I have a lot of my information there, so that's why you haven't really seen me turn off my line drawing layer, because man, once I turn that off, my brain is just gonna go whoop. It's literally going to turn off as well. So you'll see me just kind of slowly toggling on and off once I feel a little bit more confident. So what you see here is, even at this phase, guys, you know, it's subjective, but even at this phase, you can actually start working in or start planning out for what your lighting scenario is going to be. A lot of times I like to kind of just visually suggest what my lighting scenario is going to feel and look like, just because it kind of gives me like a pre-warning of like where my bright areas are going to be versus my darker areas. So if I know for a fact that I'm going to have areas of high contrast, I want to make sure I leave enough room to be able to build up kind of the value structure in that area. If I have areas of low contrast, then I know, you know, I can kind of chill out on the details and not put as much emphasis on the details. So for example, like behind the character, it's pretty dark, right? There's we see arches and we see some weird textury stuff, but really beyond that, I don't need to add any more because it's pretty dark, you know. Unless you're gonna zoom in and squint and, you know, nitpick the hell out of my painting, then you're gonna find a lot of issues, right? But for the image to read, you only want to be clear in your focal point. And really, the focal point for this image is going to be the character, but also mainly where the light is going to land on. And right now, the light is kind of mainly on the bottom half of the character, and it's going to kind of, you know, vignette or gradate, or have a gradation that's going to go upward. So you'll see me kind of like working on the little step column here of what he's standing on, and just adding in kind of those little details. I'm totally biting off Mullins here, so I'm not gonna take any credit for coming up with this concept, because it's basically a wannabe Craig Mullins fan art painting. So it was one of those things where I always look at his work and I'm like, can I do that? I wonder if I can do that, man. And then you look at it for so long, believing that you think you can do it, and then when you actually get to the painting, you're like, oh shit, this shit's hard, man. So this is like, I'm actually learning while doing this as well. So if I sound like I'm like an experienced pro, please take it with the smallest grain of salt. Okay, so continuing to refine just some of those shapes. And when I say shapes, a lot of it means some of the internal shapes of the character. And I'm using my handy dandy pattern stamp tool. And those little textures that I imported are textures that I found and I've collected over years and years. And you guys, I highly recommend you guys making your own set. It's something that, you know, I would share it, but you know, I promised a good friend of mine that I would keep it just amongst us. But process wise and understanding what the tool does, it's a pretty awesome tool, and I highly recommend you guys you know, trying it out and import your own textures. And it can be from your own paintings, it can be textures of abstract artists, and you'll see me here in a bit importing some textures from some other abstract paintings. So at this point, I'm trying to see, you know, what the hell this mask is doing. Right now, it just looks like a kind of like a diamond. But again, I'm trying to figure out like what is the shape. And when I say shape, guys, it's always about kind of the internal shape designs, meaning like the hood has a certain distinct flow, it has a certain distinct shape, it has a distinct design. The armor also has a distinct design and shape. So I want to make sure as I'm painting, I want to be very, very mindful of what that looks like and how can I make it look better. How can I paint it so that it looks effortless, but it still communicates what I want. So that's why I'm constantly looking at the overall shape, and you'll constantly hear me say, "Oh, what's the shape?" And it's a term that a lot of illustrators use, because when they paint, it's always about the shape. So the shape of the drapery or the shadows need to convey a sense of design, but also a sense of detail as well. So I'm trying to kind of create a little bit of that crease here. And a lot of times, like when I'm working in the details, like the crease here, I don't want it to fight. So notice how it's a lot softer, because again, a lot of the hard details, meaning like the details that have a lot of sharp edges, are going to be kind of the silhouette, or it's going to be areas where there's literally a dark shadow, like a black shadow. So you can see where the pants and the fabric is, there's literally a line, right? So what I'm doing here is I've selected a brush with overlay, and I just kind of want to capture a little bit of that bounce light, right? And that bounce light it's kind of crucial to giving it some material indication, and it really helps to kind of make it not as flat. So if you guys have character paintings or renderings or images or whatever it is, and you're trying to convey some sort of metal, be sure to give it a little bit of reflectivity. It really helps. It makes you believe that it is some sort of metallic material or texture that's picking up a lot of this extra source of light. I do apologize. I sound like a total, like, I don't like sounding too academic because it sounds boring as shit. But there are just some technical rules that I feel obligated to share with you guys, just so I'm covering all my bases. So please bear with me on that. I know it sounds really dry and boring. It's like, we're gonna talk about how physics works or how color relationships are. I'm like, really, dude? Who wants to hear that shit? But when it comes to making an accurate illustration, it's kind of important to know it, at least to a certain degree. The guys that kind of geek over it more than others, obviously it shows in their paintings. It just shows how proficient they are, and also how knowledgeable they are as well. You can just really see that they pay attention to reflections or this and that. All right, just pulling out a little bit of my my little texture brush here, but I'm just trying to refine that edge, right? That shape. So I want that shape to be really clean, because again, for your character design, if you're doing a character or a creature, one thing is you want to make sure that the silhouette is relatively clear, in the sense that you can understand the form, you can understand the figure. However, you don't want it to be just so clean that it literally looks like you copy and pasted it into a background. You'll see later on, I'm gonna start kind of basically blending out some of the edges of my character painting, and that's kind of what I mean by creating a lost edge versus a clean edge. A lost edge is basically when you have an image that's either close in value, that starts to just coincidentally blend together, and your eye allows it to find an opening or a gap to kind of flow into the image or enter or exit into the image. Or it's either that, or basically your brushstroke is so messy that it becomes a lost edge. So there's two types of lost edges. Either it's really just vignette-y and your brushwork is, it's literally that abstract that it just kind of fades away, or it's so close in value that you get a natural lost edge. So it tends to kind of sit or stay within those two realms. And we can get like more technical and say, well, you can get a lost edge through textures and this and that, but to keep it simple and to keep it in layman's terms, basically you're either going to get a lost edge through fuzzy brushwork or through values or color. So working a little bit more of that shadow there. I'm starting to just kind of like slowly build up the painting. If you guys need to take breaks, through your own paintings or even this demo, just take a break, step away. I mean, there's one thing about like sitting there and powering through your artwork is insane. It's insane. I mean, I only know a couple guys that can do that, but it is literally insane. Your brain is working as hard as it can, and to try to get the image to work really well, I mean, it's going to be a huge hit or miss, so it really helps to kind of break away periodically, to come back to your painting, to figure it out, see what's wrong with it, go get lunch, do something different, play some games, and then kind of come back to the image and see, okay, this looks effed up, let me fix it, and what's the best way to fix it. It's a lot of times I tend to kind of refrain from just like powering through the image, because what happens is like I'll end up making like tons more mistakes. So I'll just kind of stop and take a break and be like, just kind of look at the overall image again, whether it's a design or painting. But it helps to kind of make really good, accurate decisions, because a lot of times when I do paintings and I'm just kind of rushing, whether it's client work or whether it's personal work, and I only have like a few hours or a day, I end up doing pretty shitty work. So if you guys want to avoid doing shitty work like I do, take a break and try to just look at it with a fresh pair of eyes. Come back to your image. I'm trying to get a little bit more clear about this architecture. And when I look at this, I'm like, damn it, there's so much more crap that I missed, and I think I could have added a lot more to the image, because I feel like it's still vague as hell, but if I'm going to bullshit anything, I'm going to say, well, it's not about the architecture, it's about the character, so it doesn't need to be detailed. I mean, that's me bullshitting and saying, it's okay to be lazy, but I mean, the biggest thing that I learned from this image was, the character is one thing, but being accurate with an architecture is, I mean, that's another beast. So any of you guys who have huge cojones to take on doing architecture work, I'd love to see it, because the amount of attention to detail and focus that it takes is insane. Alright, so at this phase, I'm like, man, I don't like that pocket of light. I know it's kind of nice, it balances things out, but it kind of draws my eye out of the frame. And that's just for me personally. I think I wanted something a bit more simple and let your eye just kind of close in on the image. So I decided, well, why not just have a gradation here? If we're gonna have it kind of transition out, at least make it a slightly different value, not value, but also different hue. So you see how I'm actually using a soft brush on multiply, and I'm just kind of just giving it like just big washes, just to figure out, okay, what is my lighting gonna be? So you can see even at this thumbnail, it's pretty close to the final image, right? So at this point, it's just really about, okay, well, now I just got to fill in the details, and you'll see where I've actually messed up or fudged the details here by using a smudge tool. So I'm just smudging out just some details. Just so like when people really look or examine this painting, it kind of looks like as if I was crazy enough to paint all those details. And when any one of your friends asks, like, oh, did you paint that? You'd be like, yeah, dude. What do you think? It took me 35 hours. You want them to have that perception. And they'll just look at you like, damn, that's awesome. But then you're just full of lies. Alright, so adding a little bit of bounce light on those architectural details, just enough so that it we're not completely just disguising everything, but it kind of gives a little bit of attention to detail, and I always want to make sure that value wise I don't get too bright or too distracting with with the main image, which is the character. It's funny because like 40 minutes in, and this demo is completely live, by the way, I've literally didn't work on the character at all. It's ridiculous. But as I'm doing all this stuff in the background, I am thinking about, okay, what should I do with my character, and how do I make it so that it reads and it punches out, so I'm trying to find ways to use the background to kind of help make the character look good. So again, one thing that I do notice is really good paintings have great contrast, whether it's through value or through texture. So one of the things that we want to keep in mind is if your character is super detailed, then you want to make sure your background is relatively simple. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, if I have some of those details, what are they going to be? And so I'm just kind of blocking out, random textures of cloth, wrist guards, maybe even like leg padding, stuff like that. But anyways, that's kind of what I mean by contrast. And you can use the environment, you can use the background to help alleviate a little bit of that kind of read. If your character is simple, then you want to make sure that your background can compensate for it and make it look interesting. Alright, so this is where we photo bash. Alright, so what I mean by photo bashing here is I'm literally using those photo elements to kind of help give me just a little bit of not a little bit, but a lot of visual bump to my work. So even though we have the painting, either one, if you just need just some of those textures from a photograph, go ahead and use them strategically. If you want to paint it, that's awesome as well. More power to you. But for me, I kind of like the juxtaposition of painting and also photo bashing. It kind of has this weird, kind of cool like blend to the work. So I like to paint something in and then use the photos to kind of help hybrid it. So even the shoulder pad looks pretty badass. Or I'll use a section of this armor here, or this armor here. I'll make a cleaner alpha, I guess. Boom, done. Now all that painting we did is completely and utterly useless. No, just kidding. But what's great about this is that now we can use this as reference, but also just as basically as kind of like a texture that I can then start to apply onto the painting. If I need more details, or if my image is lacking a lot of information, then at least I can use this stuff to kind of plug in. So like even starting with, let's say, even the top here, right? I can shrink it down, match it, but just that cloth detail is so nice. Like, and the crunching of the fabric is really, really nice. So first thing I always do is put it on either soft light or overlay. Tends to work the best. Why? I honestly don't have the answer for you. It has something to do with algorithms and just the way it literally, you know, gives it the perfect look. But what I do is, once I plug it in, I like to create a mask. And you see that little window next to the layer? That's a mask. And I'm just revealing what I only need. And sometimes I'm going to use all of it, and sometimes I'm only going to use 2% of it, you know? And it's just to help kind of drive the image a little bit further than what it already is. And it'll give me information like, oh, look how the fabric can actually you know, fold or get crunched there. And sometimes I'll erase out, you know, like if it gets too noisy, I'll just be like, well, screw it. I don't want all these little bells and whistles on here, so let's just erase it out. Looks too photo bashy, you know what I mean? So I'm gonna go ahead and even add this little fabric here. Put on maybe soft light. See, that works, right? Overlay is too gnarly. You see that? It's like way too strong. So soft light's really good. And a lot of times, if your image or your texture in soft light is way too strong, what you can always do, you can always alter and change the value of your texture just by using levels or adjusting the image itself. And I'm just using the mask again to import that. And when you look at it, you're like, damn. And if people ask you, like, how'd you render that cloth? Just tell them you did it all by hand. Just be like, yep, did it purely. Just awesome. You know, you got to take 35, you know, spend like 35 weeks in figure drawing and costume design classes to make sure you can do the best freaking folds ever. And then all your friends will be like, damn, you're like the best at doing costumes. And just totally ride that fake train for a little while until you get caught. But yeah, no, totally, I'm lying, but totally, you know, it's a very effective tool. It's great to, you know, kind of suggest the type of materials with the details. And so a blend of using photo and painting has always been, you know, you always get some really interesting looks. All right, so adding in like maybe some details on this arm guard or this wrist guard. I'm totally painting out the hand. Doesn't look good, so let's just keep the hand. And maybe just add a little bit of texture or a little bit of some design details here. All right. So I'm gonna slightly darken down the hand a little bit. It's a bit bright. And I'm obviously using multiply. There's obviously different tools you can use, but I just want to kind of knock down the basically the value, because it is very, very bright. You know, it literally, the painting becomes about the hands if it's that bright, and I don't want to draw too much attention, so I'm knocking it down. So we're about 50 minutes, close to 50 minutes in. And it's not bad, right? I mean, for a sketch to get this far within within the hour, I mean, it's pretty good. Um, and one thing that I would say is, always think about, how your image reads. I mean, a lot of times, even with all these details, it can sometimes kind of mess up how your design or your painting looks, just because of the amount of contrast and basically the amount of lighting, or the amount of value that it creates within your image. It can actually disrupt your image. So you'll kind of see me creating a mask again for the arms, because I felt like it was a bit too distracting, and I wanted something a little bit more, I guess, just indicated, and not necessarily pull away from the painting. And you guys notice how I'm actually working fairly one-to-one with my canvas here. So at this entire time, if you don't need to zoom in, dude, don't zoom in. Just stay away from your painting and see if you can work with the entire image at this scale. I know a lot of guys who zoom way in, and that becomes like you're literally painting pixels, man. At later on, when there's like Photoshop CS like 75, we're gonna be able to get onto like more, atom level, or like literally start painting molecules, and you're at that point it's just retarded, so try to stay at a relatively good distance away from your painting, so you can look at the overall picture, kind of see everything as a whole, and don't get too lost in the overall image of everything. Try to just look at everything as a whole. Kind of widening that shoulder a little bit. Maybe just add a little bit of that, maybe a large sleeve here or something. Some dark cast shadow, or some sort of shadow from the folds. And I'm just kind of working in like, okay, well, what does his armor look like? And for those of you guys who don't know, I'm actually using the texture texture 10 with no color. Apologize, my brushes are completely just the most unorganized thing, but it's all good. So I'm using basically that brush to kind of create that painterly kind of look, but then also it just has nice edges, so I'm able to kind of control my painting with a little bit more fidelity. Alright, so adding a little bit of of that headdress, or that cloak, the hoodie of the cloak. And then I'm going to start refining a little bit of this because this part of the clothing here, because I felt like the shoulders were a little bit unresolved, so I'm thinking maybe we can just kind of make a selection here, and I almost want to see what happens if I add a little bit more of a more color and just maybe more punch of value here to give it that reflectivity. Just to kind of give that nice little edge. And this is what I mean by edge, right? It's just to be able to see that shape. That's what I want. So I'm going to carve out a little bit of that detail there. Maybe some like little some folds on the hoodie there. just defining some of that crease. And a lot of times with painting, it's always about editing down. You know, erase, paint out, or paint in information that you need. Only that you need. If it's unnecessary, paint it out, man. You don't need all the details. You only need what is going to work or what's going to help your painting. Alright, so let's get to this face mask. He totally looks like Shredder from Ninja Turtles. And I mean kind of the old one, but alright, so let's see here. I was thinking about a lot of things. I was thinking about like a red mask or something else, but something that I always do as a little lazy trick is I'll use part of my own painting to put on a mask or to put on some extra details. Why? Because one, it's your own painting. You can do whatever you want, but it kind of creates some sort of consistency with the materials, but also it's just a really quick effect. So already right there, it's starting to look pretty decent. And I'm just gonna go ahead and just kind of refine this a little bit. Give it just a tad bit of form and a little bit more definition in terms of like where that mask ends, and also just maybe clean this out a little bit. I always kind of like mess around and I always add extra little bits here, but what's cool is that mask already has a little bit of that bounce light, right? And so it gives a lot of just visual value to your image now. It's kind of like it looks as if we intentionally added that little bit of, you know, bounce light just to kind of show that we, you know, even the mask has material indication. Again, I'm just simplifying the mask a bit. And a lot of times, like, you know, as you're painting, I'm constantly moving around my painting, you know, trying to not stay necessarily in one area. I always want to try to find, you know, there's a lot of things that are unresolved of the painting, like the sleeve, the foot is not even done, the ground isn't done, the background's not done. However, I want to resolve the image one step at a time, and I don't want to over render one area. I just kind of want to pick and choose my battles, you know. I want to see what makes sense, and just kind of see if I really do need to resolve everything or just that one thing, and kind of move on. Maybe add just a little bit of that, you know, reflective blue, because again, this is metallic, so I definitely want a little bit more reflectivity in the materials. And maybe even just on the belt too, you know, just a little bit of a little highlight that's coming through. Just some negative shapes here, because I felt like the chest plate of that was a little just heavy and clunky. So maybe just something to kind of give it a little bit of just a little negative shape there. You'll constantly see me again just making a mark and then erasing, making a mark and erasing, because in terms of design, you know, it's kind of like, does it make sense? Does it look good? Maybe not. Just kind of working on kind of parts of the wrist guard or the arm guard here, and then just maybe start defining it just a little bit more. I don't know why I started this whole Assassin series things. I think it initially started off as a fan art, and a tribute to the Assassin's Creed thing, but it was just actually just really fun. I don't know why I started it, to be honest. It was I've never really drew assassins before, so it was one of those things like, you know, why not try it out, and see if you can do it. and I did my first couple, and I just started enjoying it. I was just kind of like, oh, this is fun. Dude with a mask, you know? All right, so decided to kind of show the underside of that cloak because it just felt too, I guess, boring. It was just like the same rhythm. You know, it's kind of like, oh, here's the front side and here's the other front side of that cloak. So I wanted to just show a little bit of the underside there. I figured it might add just a little bit more visual interest to our character. Again, just kind of resolving just little tiny details on our character, like armor and stuff like that. And at this point, you know, again, you'll notice that I'm still working at a relatively, uh, you know, a far distance. Um, but when you're working with details like that, you can zoom in. It's okay to zoom in because you want to be fairly accurate. So I have a fairly large monitor. So a lot of times, you know, even for small details, it's even okay for me to just kind of stay at a certain distance because it almost, it's like me as if like I'm actually just zooming in. My face is probably 1 inch away from the screen and I look like a total retard. But I actually like to zoom in on those little tiny details just to be a bit more accurate. But with the overall painting, you want to stay a safe distance away. You know, you kind of want to, try to you know, get a majority of that that impression of your painting at that distance. You know, so like it's like at that read, you want it to read at this level, at this distance. If it doesn't read here, there's some things that look weird, then you definitely want to fix it. So now onto the feet. Let's see here. Extending part of that garment there. But most importantly, I'm trying to. I felt like, again, like if there's too many things that are repeating, like if the feet are repeating or the garments repeating and compositionally it looks the same, then I want to try to do my best to really create some sort of a different visual language. And when I mean visual language, just something that looks different from the other. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just trying to see if I can just extend the foot or do something different, so it doesn't look like a stiff pose. I mean, because it's already pretty stiff. It's just a dude standing there with the bow and arrow. But I definitely want to try to give it a little bit of a slight difference, so you can look at it and you can kind of see that it has a different play of shapes and a different play of details. All right, so I'm gonna just kind of clean up this hoodie a little bit, especially on the edges. Add a little bit of a dark value here, and then go back to my background layer, and I'm just gonna make a selection here because it feels like I totally messed up here, and it felt all too compressed. So I'm just gonna drag this detail down. So I still want our character to be on the edge or the ledge of the this building, but definitely don't want it to be literally just halfway, you know. So I'm gonna add a little bit of this nice shadow here, and again, our character is being basically lit from underneath, and there's kind of this big ambient bounce light that the character is getting. So I kind of want the shadow to be a little bit more, you know, ambiguous, but also it still has a slight bit of direction, but it's more of a diffused shadow. So what you're seeing here is I'm just kind of suggesting the direction of shadow so that we can reinforce the lighting. Again, I don't want to cover all of the architecture, especially on the right side. I kind of want a little bit of that, so. All right. So let's go here. Let's see here. So made the adjustment on the ground, and I think I want to try to give a little bit of this ground a brighter value. So I'm going to go ahead and just color pick here. It's kind of blended in, but I'm thinking like it might be cool to have a fairly distinct lit ground. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put this in a group so that we can work with a flattened background. Just keeps things easier. And again, just toggling back and forth. I noticed that this little part of the architecture was a little funny. So I'm just going to clean that edge up a little bit. And just darken this down. Because again, it didn't really do too much design-wise to show all that off. So that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm trying to figure out what's the best way to consolidate some of that information, but keep it relatively simple. Maybe just testing out, seeing if there's a way for me to kind of give this a little bit more of a defined edge without getting too detailed. I just kind of want the edge of that to be graphically clear. It's always tricky because I think if there's anything that I learned in painting is learning when to be really abstract, or learning when to be loose, and learning when to be very, very clear and meticulous. Because I think with Photoshop it's just hard because we have the ability to zoom in, so we can actually render and detail the crap out of everything, But what happens is that your painting becomes overworked and it just becomes really, really bland really quickly. So a lot of times, like, I find that when I make a certain mark or a certain I guess rendering, I always try to see if I can kind of destroy or disrupt the rendering by putting like a large brush stroke on top, just to simplify it, to simplify the read. Because again, I don't want my images to look and feel totally overworked. So I think it kills the essence of that kind of that artistic flavor or that feel, So here I'm just gonna go ahead and just lighten this up a bit. I think a lot of those details are kind of unnecessary, so I'm just gonna let those details kind of be on the very bottom here. But I'm just gonna go ahead and just add a bit more definition to the molding on the bottom here. Again, using my handy dandy texture brush, and notice how the details are only staying relatively in the area of highest contrast, right? So which is like that light area, so it keeps our eye kind of focused there. And so I'm gonna have a lot of my shadow details be kind of a little bit more pronounced there. Maybe slightly define this ground plane. It kind of gets a bit lost. So I'm going to use a much more simple brush here. I'm going to put this on darken, and I'm just going to kind of darken the bottom here a little bit. Now notice what's happening. Like, you see the shadow side of my cape? Look what's happening right there. That's getting lost. Now, it's good only if you only if it helps the painting or if it helps it read. But it will become really confusing because now our eye doesn't even see that cape. So from a distance, when I pull back, all I see is a little bit of that leg. So we need something to slightly close that off. So I'm just going to, as a reminder, just keep note of that as that lost edge. Okay? Because graphically, I do want that background to be pretty simple and dark. But I want to somehow kind of bump up the difference between the actual clothing and the background. So I've obviously made the background darker, and I'm going to go ahead and continue working on the background. Just add a little bit more indication of architectural detail. Let's see here. Maybe just a couple of architectural lines, just so that it's not just a simple flat ground. I'm going to darken this side as well, and still keep it fairly simple, but it's going to definitely give the edge of that pillar right there a cleaner and straighter edge. So let's go ahead and just clean that up a little bit. But notice how like loose that is, right? A lot of times, like when I do my other paintings, like it would almost, kill me to have something that loose and undefined. But it's a good practice to just kind of, make one or two marks and just kind of step away from it and let the focus have the most amount of brush detail. The focus here is my character, so anything else around it, it's got to be looser, just by sheer contrast. Right? I'm trying to be as accurate as how a camera works. Anything that's out of focus is going to be not as defined. So that's kind of the goal here. Making my mark there. Maybe define just this little edge here. Just a couple of little pings of light that's kind of reflecting upwards. And you can go days and days on this type of painting. But I think one thing that's really cool is that we're a little over an hour in, and already we have a fairly promising image where if we want to take it further, we absolutely can. So again, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to email or ask me. My email is jpforjohnpark@gmail.com. Or if you guys are friends with me, or if you guys use Facebook, and I'm assuming a majority of you guys use Facebook, I'm also active on Facebook as well. Feel free to email me there. But yeah, I'd love to see what you guys come up with this technique, because the only thing I'm gonna ever come up with is assassins. So yeah, try it out. Let me know what you guys think, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask. All right, let's see here. Gonna add in a little bit more detail to this plating here. Maybe just some more cut lines, just to kind of graphically give it a little bit more beef to it. Maybe just define this little edge here. I'm gonna give this side a little bit of a darker value here, just to show that sleeve is coming down. just to show a little bit of that separation. I'm going to simplify this section of the background just a little bit. I feel like it's a little unnecessary to have all that detail next to a detailed character. So again, I'm constantly playing with juxtaposition. Maybe just a little bit of cool lighting. And you'll see that, like, you know, it's not necessarily like blue lighting, but it's a more of a desaturated value. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a mark and then undo and then just use that as my base lighting. So I'm just going to add just a little bit of a cool lighting. And the reason why I'm doing that is, one, so that the image in the background doesn't feel too monochromatic. And it can easily feel very monochromatic if everything is the same kind of hue. And since everything's pretty warm and also pretty dark, you know, it doesn't hurt to add just a little bit more of you know, fill light or reflective light from the sky. Alright, let's see here. What else can we do here? Thinking maybe just a little bit more, just a little bit of fill light here. On that edge there. And this is where, remember how I mentioned before how we had that edge of that, the clothing kind of be lost? This is where I'm going to kind of bring it back. So I'm going to add a little bit of a defined edge there, so that it, you know, it doesn't get completely lost. So that now we kind of brought back a little bit of that silhouette. Adding a little bit more. I was thinking maybe just a little kick of light here, because again, the ground is pretty bright. So I'm gonna go ahead and just add a little bit of color to the ground here, of a brighter color, so it's not just orange. But since light is hitting the ground, I definitely want a bit of that, especially on the left side. I do apologize, the brush is super small, so you guys probably wondering like what's happening. But yeah, the bottom side of it is something that I just kind of wanted to give a little bit more of a lighter value. I'm just kind of carving a little bit of the headdress here, just so it's clean. Kind of want something to kind of fade a little bit into black, or fade out from the black. Gonna just refine the a little bit of the armor here. Keep painting away. Let's see here. So again, just kind of pulling back, see how everything looks. Sometimes if I make a mark and I'm unsure, just pull back, look at it, and just kind of delete what you don't want, because a lot of times it actually helps to kind of look at the entire image from a distance and just see if it looks good at all, you know. I'm gonna adjust the sleeve a little bit here, because I felt like it was a bit too low, even though it is slightly lower than the other sleeve there. I just felt like it was a bit too low. I'm gonna clean a little bit of that fuzz, like weird. There was like a weird mark right there on the hoodie, so I'm gonna clean that edge up a little bit. Pull back, kind of look at the overall image. Just define a little bit more of that mask here. Add some more like design details. Like notice how small the brush strokes get in my details, right? Like so on the mask and on the actual bust, it's pretty small. So what that means is like our eye wants to think that, oh shoot, this is obviously the focal point because of how small the brush strokes are, you know? I'm gonna add a little bit of a more of a defined shadow shape here, and maybe just some extra definition on the actual armor here. Just have a little bit of a cleaner design detail. If you really zoom in, I mean, a lot of the details kind of they do kind of break. So I mean, it's only meant to be viewed at a certain distance, and also it's really meant to just be a sketch. So you know, if you guys are doing this for professional work and you're showing your clients, you know, this type of work, just make sure that they're clear that this is still considered somewhat of a sketch. You know, it's not a loose sketch, but it is considered more of a sketch than it is a finalized rendering. So a lot of things that are still relatively loose, you know. Just add my couple little bits of bling and light bits here. Maybe just some more detail down in like the pant leg area. And imagining like maybe this can be some sort of a fabric or something that's like kind of that has a little bit of like a tight lacing there or something, or some sort of texture. So I felt like it was quite boring, so I wanted to add something just a little bit extra there. Alright, so this is getting pretty close now. Now we're gonna try to look at the entire image more from a I guess lighting standpoint. Like, you know, what can we do to kind of refine the lighting a bit more? So from here, I definitely want to see if there's anything else that we're missing, whether it's defining a little bit more of the shadow, or if it's you know, giving it a little bit more punch to the lighting. Because right now everything, the character itself is still relatively flatly lit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to, as I'm refining my character, I'm going to start refining it through the use of shadow and light. Because in terms of design, it's still it's pretty relatively you know, relatively defined. You know, there's a lot of stuff that we resolved, but now at this point it's just all about the you know, executing the light, you know, and the shadows, how everything kind of works harmoniously. All right, let's see here. Gonna define this bow a little bit. It's looking a bit kind of sloppy at the end here. Now again, notice like what I kind of chose to define and what I kind of decided to leave abstract. Um, there's things that it's okay to be abstract if it's not the main focal point. It's going to my handy dandy, pattern stamp, adding in those extra bits of color, and notice, look what it does. It adds so much range of color. And this is on a impressionist mode, and what it does, it calculates the range of color in there, and it just kind of tries to give it a nice, basically a nice kind of like gradation of colors. So that's kind of what you're seeing there. I thought this was a little too harsh, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of back it off a little bit, kind of go back to what we originally had. Maybe the little string can be pulled there, or it can be pulled downward. I think it looks a bit more relaxed, I think. A bit more subtle. Alright, cool. Could add a little bit more definition to the bow. Again, for you bow experts out there, like, I do apologize. This is a totally bastardized version of what I think a bow looks like, but it's obviously the design isn't about the bow, but just kind of more of a I guess an impression of a bow. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of color dodge. So on a separate layer, I'm just color dodging just some parts of the image here to see if we can get a little bit more punch to the image. And I just want to see how the image looks if we were to really give the character a little bit more reflectivity in the armor. And it doesn't look too bad. It looks pretty decent to give a little bit more shine to the actual suit. So I'm definitely gonna kind of stick with that. And I think it helped kind of reinforce a little bit of that kind of bounce light. Our eyes are constantly drawn to contrast, so it definitely helps kind of separate the difference between the clothing or the fabric and the actual armor. Now I'm going to go ahead and use a texture brush on darken mode, and this is really good if you guys want to kind of reinforce your shadows. And notice the shadow there. The shadow became a lost edge because it is relatively close to the same value or color as the background. The reason why I wanted to do that is because, one, it follows the shadow direction, right? It follows the lighting direction. But two, it actually looks better when it's not as outlined, because we already have a fairly clean silhouette on the upper part of the body. On the lower half, we have a relatively, one side is pretty clear in terms of where the silhouette of the character is, but then the other side, I kind of wanted to, on the right side, I definitely wanted it to be a little bit more of a lost edge. And so that's kind of where the whole lost edge thing, or technique, basically comes in. Okay, time for abstract textures. So check this out, guys. If you don't really care about the whole pattern stamp technique and you want a little bit more flavor to your image, I brought in some abstract textures. I googled it, and obviously I'm using parts of it, so I don't want to get in trouble for literally plagiarizing. However, I'm going to use this abstractly as I can, and I'm going to blow it up, and I'm just going to use it in parts of my image just to give a little bit more, I guess, artistic kind of flair, like as if I kind of painted it with very thick textures. So I'm going to add this here, and what's great about this is by adding it on soft light, you get a lot of those fun little textures. Like a lot of those little marks would have been almost very hard for me to actually paint. So I'm going to add that in. Same with the right side here. I'm going to put it on soft light and just kind of bump up the details a little bit so that it's it's not as harsh. And I'm just going to go ahead and add a mask so I can just kind of paint in where I need those textures. So definitely I want it on this column a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and paint white to reveal. And it just adds just a little bit. I mean, it's like 10% really. I mean, it's not supposed to make your entire image, completely change 180 degrees. It's just supposed to add a little bit of spice, right? You do the same on this side as well, just a little bit. Obviously, if it's too much, then you can definitely take it away or take it back. And then this ground piece, I thought it was nice in terms more of in color. So I'm gonna use double click, and I'm gonna actually use what's called the blend mode, and this is great for just kind of blending into your actual layers. And I'm gonna use a mask to kind of reveal just areas of where I want that color to come through. So really effective technique. Really good for when you just need a little boost in your painting. Again, a lot of the stuff that I'm showing you guys here is not necessarily meant to be used to make your paintings 100 times better, but only when you need just a slight bit of visual boost is when I'm using these techniques. Because it is digital tools, and it's one thing that if I learned anything from Craig Mullins, he always uses these little tricks to kind of give a bit more boost and flavor into his paintings. It's literally just like spices or something, man. It's like use the peppers to make it more spicy or something, That's kind of the way I'm treating it. So I'm gonna add it here just to see if it looks good. Probably won't really work, but just go through the modes. And a lot of times, you'll find something that works, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily work that well. But here it's not that bad. Just add a little bit of that kind of grunge. Turn it on and off. Toggle constantly just to see. And again, notice how far away I'm applying this texture. I'm gonna lighten it up a little bit. Add it here just in little bits. Again, I don't want it to break my lighting scenario, so that's the biggest thing. Just darken this down a little bit. See how that looks? Alright, so we're pretty much coming to the end of our demo here. Just some final touches on the lighting, and just kind of graphically, I want it to be very kind of creeping from the bottom left corner, and obviously hit our character and have a little splash of light on the right side. I'm going to use the unsharpened mask to kind of give it a final, that Craig Mullins-y kind of feel. It also kind of just really shows off a lot of our brush strokes and marks. So as we zoom in, you can kind of see how that looks. Any final touch-ups or detail, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of refine a little bit on top. So you'll notice that I'll constantly always flatten my layer on top, because again, like when it comes to painting, and if there's anything that I learned from this process, it's all about keeping it relatively simple for yourself. So I definitely want to have a much more the freedom of being able to just kind of edit and switch things on and off. So you'll see me kind of toggle, see what works right here, on and off on that, and the final right there, on and off. Kind of look at it from a distance. Looks pretty good. And I'm just gonna erase a little bit away. I think the highlight on the chest was a little much, so I'm gonna erase that away. Awesome. Well, this concludes the demo, guys, and I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.